Kareem, hello.
Hi, Jeff.
So nice to see you.
Same here.
Thank you for sticking around and not going home.
Happy to do so. Great to see you.
It's nice to see you. We've got friends in Moulin Avant and in the Roussillon, as well as some New Yorkers.
Right on.
So,
Très
so
bien.
is it raining out there? It just started raining. I'm in Connecticut,
No.
right? We're,
We had a light rain earlier, but at the moment it's dry, which is
maybe
why
I
I'm.
have your light rain.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just start by tell us who you are, your background, and how you got into the wine business.
I'm a second generation winemaker at my family's wine estate, Paumanok Vineyards, here on the North Fork of Long Island. I've been here full time now for 22 years. And really since '01 in the winemaking capacity. I learned from my father, and my two brothers are involved as well. My brother Nabil is our vineyard manager. My brother Salim is our office manager. My parents are both kind of beginning to step out of it a bit. They're self-isolating in Florida, in Naples, Florida, where they have a home, and they're
Nice.
hunkering down there. Yeah,
Good for them.
yeah,
And so you're officially the winemaker because I think of you as the face of the vineyard too, because we've done some events together and you come
yeah.
to the city a lot.
Hmm.
So what does that job entail?
The winemaker.
Just well, everything that you do.
I wear a lot of hats. So in addition to the winemaking, where I'm overseeing all of the as soon as my brother hands off the grapes to me, so to speak, and we're obviously working together in the vineyard too. But once we harvest the fruit, I'm overseeing all every step of the vinification, grape reception and pressing and juice work and getting the fermentations going all the way through to bottling, and then I do a lot of the marketing. As you know, I've been pounding the pavement in New York City for many years. My wife Karen has been our sales rep on Long Island for many years as well now, since 2007. We're with VOS Selections is our distributor now, and for all of New York State, aside from Long Island, aside from Nassau and Suffolk,
Mm-hmm.
and I work very closely with our tasting room staff for like our front of the house operation here at Paumanok. Anyone who's been to a winery on Long Island, that we can have a pretty significant hospitality business. We get quite busy in the summer and fall,
Mm-hmm.
where we see sometimes hundreds of visitors a day.
Well, I do want to talk about that more, so don't let me forget. We'll come back. But are you available in other states?
We ship direct to about 10 other states, and then we ship to about another 30 additional states through a company called Vino Shipper that helps us deal with all the compliance associated with shipping to different states.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as direct distribution, well, with VOS we're in New Jersey and Pennsylvania
Mm-hmm.
through VOS, and then we're with Horizon in Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
And then in Florida, we're with PG Fine Wine, a small distributor in Florida based out of Naples, where my parents are.
Oh, cool. Going to shift to their online because they are
Yeah,
like you, a lot of restaurant presence. Has that happened a lot? Are you selling
yeah,
more online? That's a big change, but you have your website
yeah.
was all ready to go and everything.
Short answer is yes. I mean, when this whole COVID storm hit, I think I'm still getting out of this prolonged state of shock that this is our
Yeah,
new reality. I think
yeah,
everyone's still kind of like, what
all of
just
us.
happened? Yeah. And and of course we feel for all of our friends and family in the restaurant world where it's just like you know it's such a sad situation, and so it's directly impacted us. We did have a pretty healthy restaurant
Yeah.
business where 20 to 25% of our overall business was to restaurants, and so to lose that all of a sudden is quite dramatic. And as you can see, the vineyard behind me,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Mother Nature doesn't pause for coronavirus, and so we've
Exactly.
actually been hiring, and as
Wow.
we know, as we normally would be to keep up with the normal flow of the season.
Okay.
And we're not hiring because we have the cash to hire, But if you don't maintain the vineyard, you lose the vintage, you lose the crop.
Yeah.
Not only do you lose this year's crop, you know, you potentially are really doing long-term damage to the vineyard. So you have to stay on top of your vineyard, obviously, and we're doing our best to do that. But our lifeline right now is online. We're doing these flash sales every week, which have been quite successful. We've been moving we've been trying to kill three birds with one stone: generate cash flow, move wine, and reduce risk to our employees of interacting with people and our customers, where there's very little, there's no contact. So from that point of view, it's actually quite successful, but it's not making up for the overall shortfall in business, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
319 just commented they received a shipment of wine and olive oil. You make olive oil?
My uncle and my cousin in the south of Spain, they have an olive orchard, and we are the U.S. importer.
Oh, that's awesome. Your family kind of fascinates me because I'm always running into people that are related to you.
We do have a big family.
I love it though. Can you explain for people that are not in New York? There's a unique sales thing, and I think it's kind of changing because I've always bought wine from Long Island. You can ship it, you can drive it in directly into the city, but now it seems like people are partnering with regular distributors. Can you just explain that a little bit? I just wonder how that is working, and in general, do you have anything to say about that?
So what?
Like it used to be that I would just call the winery and you could just drive it into the city, but now I think people are with distributors.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, yeah. So most of us, many of us on Long Island are farm wineries, and farm wineries are special in the New York State Liquor Authority parlance. We're allowed to violate the three-tier system, where we can be a manufacturer,
okay,
a wholesaler, and a retailer. And as you know, normally you can only be on one of the three tiers. You can't be on more than one at once. And we can be on all three because we're a farm, and New York State has determined that it's in the state's interest to sort of do what it can to support farmers and keep farming families in farming. And so, and it's, I think it's a great program. I mean, for my 2 cents, I think it's, I mean, we couldn't do what we do without it because of the high cost of doing business here. It's essential for us to be able to retail and wholesale. Yeah. But to get to your point, though, I mean, you know, for many years, as you know, we self-distributed. Some of our colleagues out here continue to do that, and you know, it becomes an individual choice of why you would go with a distributor or continue to self-distribute. It's a trade-off between, honestly, it has a lot to do with margin. When we go with the distributor, we give up margin. But the reason we're going with the distributor is because they have a well-developed network of contacts and a sales force. And, you know, in my case, I just simply wasn't, I knew I wasn't doing our brand justice by the limited amount of time I was able to get in. And so, by going,
VOS is great. They and I think they're a good partner too. They're a nice presence in the city, and I love Marie Couet's my rep, and Victor does a great job.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Can you just to step back a few and just explain? There's some people from around the world on here. Can you explain the region of Long Island as a wine growing and what it's comparable to and what's special about Long Island?
Absolutely. So we're a cool maritime climate. We're here about where our property is. We're about 70 miles east of Manhattan. You know, roughly a little bit over 100 kilometers east of Manhattan, and so we're surrounded by water. We have the Atlantic about 6 miles away or so. The Peconic Bay is only a half a mile as the crow flies, and Long Island Sound is a couple miles to our north. And so we're very much a maritime climate. It's a relatively cool climate. We get winters here that can be quite cold, but not cold enough to kill the vines, thankfully. Thank God. We haven't seen any real winter damage in decades at this point. And the topography is similar to what you can see behind me. It's mostly flat, but and so if I was to compare our terroir to anywhere in the world, it would probably be Bordeaux, just because we have so much in common with Bordeaux in a broad sense, including the topography, where there's a lot of, you know, flat terrain in Bordeaux. And the same is true here, where the reason we get away with being on flat land is because the soils drain really incredibly well.
I see. Okay.
Long Island was created during the last ice age, and when the glaciers receded, they left this moraine field, all this alluvial outwash, where our soil types are a sandy loam with sandy, gravelly subsoils, and it's hard to beat that for drainage. And so when we do have a rain event, like a big rain event, we rarely ever see standing water. It's like a giant sieve. It just drains right through. You don't really see standing water in the field.
And then so I've discovered your Chenin at Bottle Rocket years ago and have been a fan ever since then. And there's actually some in the cellar at Waverly right now. But then we also did a event together, and I discovered your, it was a reserve Cabernet Franc, I want to say 13, that I fell in love with. Can you tell us the grapes that you make and why something would be unique, how your Chenin is different from coming from Paumanok?
The Chenin Blanc in particular?
Well, in general, tell us what grapes you grow and what wines you make and why they're different.
Sure. Well, we do quite a bit, actually. So, I mean, today we're producing wine from 8 varieties.
Okay.
For the longest time, we've grown the only Chenin Blanc in New York. I don't think that's true anymore. I've heard reports of some up in the Finger Lakes, but for a long time, we've been the only Chenin grown in New York. So we have Chenin Blanc, Riesling. My mother was born and raised in the Pfalz, and we've been growing Riesling since 1983, and Chardonnay since 1983. Sauvignon Blanc, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Petit Verdot. And then recently, in the last couple of years, we've added Pinot Noir just for bubbly, not for red wine, and Malbec and Albarino.
Okay.
And we're going to be planting Melon de Bourgogne within sometime next month.
Wow. How many, I think in hectares, but how much land do you have?
So at Paumanok, it's been fluctuating. We planted about 20 acres over the last 2 years, but we also ripped out some acreage. So right now we're right around 80, and but some of that's the 20 acres are some of the 20 acres is going to come into production this vintage in 2020. About 7 of those 20 acres that were just planted will start producing this vintage.
And then can you tell me about your sparkling? People are always fascinated about bubbles.
Yeah, for many years we would buy bubbly from our neighbors, from Lenz or from Wolfer, to have around the holidays, that sort of thing. And finally we said, maybe we should. Why don't we make our own? We drink a fair amount ourselves, and we figured, it's great for when you do wine dinners, great to offer to our wine club. And so starting with the 09 vintage, we started making a Blanc de Blanc with our own fruit, and everything's méthode champenoise, where we would do the whole hand harvest, whole cluster pressing here at Paumanok. I would do all the base wine vinification here. And we've been working with Lenz Winery in Paumanok, just a 15-minute drive east of here, where first with Eric Fry and now the current winemaker at Lenz, Tom Spodek, we're doing our Blanc de Blanc over there. It gets a minimum of 3 years on tirage. It actually ends up being often closer to 40 months before it's disgorged.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have some magnums, which are going to be, I think it's 9 years now that we're up to, and we just disgorged the first mags earlier this year from the 2010 vintage.
Wow.
Yeah.
And in general, do you blend, or the wines that I've mentioned are single varietal? Do you have other blends?
We do more blending with the reds. We don't do much blending with the whites. And the bubbly is always a vintage wine, so it's not blended. We have a sparkling Chenin Blanc in Entourage over there as well from the 17 vintage, and I need to taste that and see how it's doing and see whether this is the year that we disgorge it or we wait another year.
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of exciting. But in general, we don't do a lot of blending with the whites. They're all mostly,
Okay.
monovarietal. Yeah.
Okay. And then how is, just in general, you're, like I was saying, like a Chenin from Paumanok is different from a Loire Valley Chenin or South African.
Yeah.
How? And maybe a Cabernet Franc and Cabernet also.
So first of all, let me just say that the Chenin at Paumanok, it wasn't like this great insight. It's one of these great stories in wine. It was a pure accident. My parents bought this property across the street in the late 80s, and the former owners had planted all kinds of varieties that my parents knew would never work on Long Island, like Zinfandel, for example, got ripped out, no question. And they were ripping out other varieties that they weren't really interested in. And Chenin Blanc, the Chenin wasn't part of the game plan. And so my father actually started ripping it out. And we had a German vineyard manager at the time who was helping and this is before we actually started making wine. We were just growers.
Okay.
And this gentleman, Uwe Michelfelde, he at the time, he told my father, he's like, Charles, the Chenin looks happy and healthy. Why are you ripping it out? Why don't you give it a chance? and the way my father tells the story, it had as much to do with him running out of time as it did listening to Uwe. But Uwe was right. The Chenin, in fact, all the Loire varieties. I mean, we're really happy with everything we have. I have to say that the Loire varieties really they just seem to be at home here. They thrive in the vineyard, and they make really delightful wines. And so I like to describe our style of Chenin as a New World style.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are a New World winery, but it really has everything to do with how it's made. We bottle it very, very young. It's almost like a nouveau. I usually bottle it before Thanksgiving.
Oh, wow.
We bottle it with the screw cap, as you know. So it's very fruit forward, fresh, crisp, zippy, vivacious, and that's a deliberate style we're going for.
Yeah.
And it often is sold out before it even begins to really show any development, which you could say on one hand is a shame, and it is, but it's also delicious to drink it when it's so young, because it has this really snappy, fresh, I like to call it sour patch
Sure.
wine, where it has that sweet and sour character.
Mm-hmm.
Or as my father says, it's like Venice lemonade. It has the same it has the same quality as lemonade. It's thirst quenching, refreshing, and just like lemonade in the summer, you put it on ice, and if you have the Chenin in an ice bucket on a hot summer day with some fresh local oysters, it's out of control. It's delicious.
Yeah, I call that lawnmower wine. It's the kind of wine you want to drink after you mow the lawn. It's so like thirst quenching and just fresh and zippy. And to me, it's as invigorating as like a sparkling wine. I like to have your wine as an aperitif as much. But it's kind of cool you get it in bottles by Thanksgiving, because it'd be good at Thanksgiving too.
Yeah, I do think it's a nice Thanksgiving wine. But all that said, now if you give it 5-6 years or more of bottle age, then it does actually begin to remind you a little more of the Loire Chenin that most of us are familiar with. And we make another Chenin, our minimalist Chenin Blanc, which is even more, I would say, going to be more of a ringer for a Loire Chenin. While it has its own identity, of course, it's a Long Island Chenin, but our minimalist Chenin we don't inoculate. In fact, we don't do anything to it at all other than a very tiny dose of sulfites. And that's barrel fermented in steel barrels. And so that wine's also, I like to say that wine is it's like drinking a cloud. It's so light and airy and puffy, and it makes you feel good. And it's so easy to drink. It's only 11% alcohol. You can drink the whole bottle in the summer and you don't feel it.
It's such a treat to hear you describe the wines because we don't normally get that. It's like our job to describe it to a table, and it's really a treat to hear the winemaker do it. What does a winemaker do all year round? Like I know you work with the viticulturist, and we always just think you're blending, but that's only one part of the year. What do
That's
you
right.
do all
Yeah.
year round
Yeah.
as the winemaker?
I'm sure you've seen those memes where it's like, this is what my mother thinks I do. This
Yes,
is what my wife thinks I
exactly.
do. This is what
Right.
my friends think I do. And this is what I really do. And so, like most people, I spend a lot of time sitting behind the computer. But no, I mean, I'm on the forklift. I'm
Well,
on
yeah,
the
you do
phone.
everything.
Yeah, I'm on the bottling line. Uh, but as far as winemaking, it varies with the season. Harvest, of course, in a winery anywhere, harvest is the best time of year. It's also the most stressful, the most intense, and
Yeah.
that's when the wine is really made. Especially the way we make wine here, we try to do if we're going to do anything at all, we're going to do it to the juice, and we try
Hmm.
to be as hands off as possible with the wine.
Hmm.
And if you're going to do that, and if you're going to make, you know, 20 different wines, like 12 to 18 wines of vintage, which is about what we do at Paumanok, and I'm also making I'm the winemaker at Palmer as well. You add it all up, I'm making 2.5 to 3 dozen wines a year. It's a lot,
Yeah.
and but I love it. I love what I do. I'm also maybe a little bit masochistic, where I'm do I really need to have kegs and corked and screw cap and mags and all these different things that we do? We probably don't, but I love being able to offer our customers a choice to say this wine's available in magnums, this wine's also available in kegs, and
Yeah.
for these wines you can get it in cork or screw cap. It's a little crazy sometimes, but at the end of the day, it's one long ongoing experiment. And I mean, we're at the point now where I have wines that have been in the bottle for 10 years, cork and screw cap, all else being equal. Same with magnums, and so on. And so, but I have to say, we couldn't do what we do if we didn't have, the support that we do from our customers, in the restaurant world, people like yourself, Jeff,
Thank
and
you.
many, many others like you, and all of our retail customers. It's just, um, it's just wonderful to have the support of Long Islanders and New Yorkers, who are our biggest customers.
Yeah. I think there's been a shift that in the past maybe year or two, like in my restaurant, I always laugh because people from Spain always drink wines from Spain. People from France always
Yeah,
drink the local wine. And so I
right, right.
love pulling out your Chenin for them. And I think like in California, they're very loyal to their California wines. But New York, I think, is just starting to get that, and
Yeah,
they're not seeing it as an anomaly. They're seeing it as a local product, and they're starting to open up to that, which has
yeah,
been fun for me to share your wines like that.
yeah.
Wendy Lasula, who's in Roussillon, hi Wendy. She asked, where does the name Paumanok come from?
Good question. Paumanok is the old native name for Long Island. If you're
Huh.
familiar with some other places on Long Island, famous places like
Mm-hmm.
Montauk or Shinnecock, Paumanok is another native place name, and it's the old native name for Long Island. And so we should really be called Massoud Family Vineyards. That's my family name. Long story short, we didn't want to use the family name, and at the beginning, when my mother discovered the name Paumanok by reading Walt Whitman,
Oh,
who was a native of Long Island, and Whitman referred to the island in his writing most often as my beloved Paumanok. And at the time when my mother sort of came up with this idea to name the winery Paumanok, I was like, it's 3 syllables. Nobody knows what it means. It's hard to pronounce. It's really not a great brand name. But now with 30 years of hindsight, it's actually the perfect name. Wine
yeah.
is wine is all about place and provenance, the origin of where the grapes are grown. So what better name than the old native name for
Yeah.
this place where we grow our grapes?
I love it. And you can't really mispronounce it. I always tell people it's Paumanok from Akabog. Can you explain where exactly on Long Island you are, maybe with the hand trick?
Yes, exactly. This is my map. It's actually accurate. So this is the Hamptons. This is
Uh-huh.
Montauk Point. This is Riverhead, and so we're right here. We're
Okay.
just east of Riverhead, right at the beginning. I don't know if you can see that, right at the beginning of the North Fork,
Yeah.
and Manhattan's like over here.
Right.
Yeah.
And now you're on the water, but like sometimes on Mediterranean wine regions, you get a little bit of that salt air in the wine. I don't think you get that out there, do you?
I mean, you mean whether you can like smell the salt in the air, that sort of thing?
In the wine, sometimes you get a little hint of the brininess, or
I
I call it the
I
beach
mean,
air.
it's funny because the power, as you know, Jeff, the power of suggestion when we
Yeah.
start talking about wine is just it's profound.
Yeah.
So I, I don't think there's any science that sort of like supports the idea just because we're close to bodies of salt water that therefore the wines are salty. But I mean, I guess maybe it's a coincidence that stylistically a lot of the wines do kind of evoke that character often. I wouldn't disagree with that. But what we have seen in rare cases is in the rare cases when we have a hurricane, most notably 1985, the first year my parents harvested grapes,
Oh,
we got hit by Hurricane Gloria.
oh my
It
God.
was a very inauspicious start for for my parents to be
Wow.
harvesting their first crop in the middle of a hurricane. But we had 110-mile-per-hour winds, and it actually blew salt water from the ocean,
Okay.
or whatever, the ocean or the bay or whatever, and it fried our canopy. And a lot of vineyards at the time had their canopy fried from salt burn from seawater.
Wow. That's crazy.
It is crazy, yeah.
No, I don't get that in your wine, but it's funny because the Atlantic is kind of an aggressive ocean, and you would think it would have an impact. So kind of, I'll let you go very shortly, but I want to just ask what's happening in the vineyards right now, and is that impacted by the quarantine in general?
The
Because
vineyard,
yeah,
um,
like they're doing starting. I've seen like when I started this project, they were just bud break and a little
yeah.
bit of frost, and now people are starting to trellis in. I was talking in Piedmont this morning, and plowing last week. Like, so what are you doing in the vineyard, and does the quarantine affect workers in the vineyard?
Yeah, okay. We're on the cusp of bud break. We don't have bud break yet, but it's imminent, and that's been a little nerve-wracking because we had one of the great things about being a New Yorker is you can relate to our vintage just by living in New York. And so as a New Yorker, it was quite a mild winter,
Yeah.
and so that was definitely nerve-wracking because we're getting very concerned about bud swell and then early bud break. And now it's gotten really quite cool again in April. And the last, 3 out of the last 7 nights or so, we've had a freeze warning. And so it's been very nerve-wracking, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to emerge unscathed from a bud kill perspective. And so my brother Nabil and his crew have been busy. First of all, pruning is completed, tying down the canes, and we have a bunch of work to set up the trellis from the vineyards. My brother planted with his crew last spring. They're putting in the posts and the wires and the stakes and grow tubes and things like that, and gearing up for the growing season, which, like I said, it could be as early. I think next week, maybe not, and by the week after, we'll be expecting bud break.
Oh, good.
And so,
Okay.
as far as COVID affecting the vineyard work, we've had meetings with our crew since this began, trying to make sure people are taking, appropriate precautions and supplying PPE, masks and gloves, and reviewing the distancing requirements. And so the biggest concern, obviously, is that whether is that, and everyone's been told the moment if they're not feeling good, they should stay home.
Yeah.
And and so
But
so far,
people are spread out in the vineyards anyways.
that's right, and you're
Yeah.
outdoors, but still, and that's specifically what we talked about. When you're outdoors, it's not as big a concern, but when you're getting a ride home, getting a ride to work, going home after work, and you're
Yeah.
getting a ride with a buddy, make sure you're wearing a mask in the car.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
smart. That's a
yeah,
lot to think about.
yeah.
Well, that's kind of, I started this project just because a lot of my friends in the city are cooped up inside, and it's nice to see outside. And a vineyard is, first of all, it's just
The sun's
pretty.
coming out. I don't know
Oh,
if you can see it.
awesome.
Yeah.
Is it, and you can see, is that the water back there?
No, no, no.
Oh, like it's blue.
Yeah.
And then just looking at vineyards is very calming for me and lots of wine people. And it's optimistic. You know, the vines don't stop. And so we all thank you for keeping them coming for next year's crop.
We're working on it.
I will let you go. Thank you for sticking around a little bit extra today to talk to me. It's been really great to talk to you and see you again. And
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Nice seeing you, man. Take care now.
You too. Take care of
Okay.
yourself.
Bye-bye.
Bye.